Hello and welcome to Field Chats, Environmental Action Civics Essentials, brought to you by EarthForce. Today, on Constitution Day in the United States, we're replaying a conversation our CEO Vince Meldrum hosted during Environmental Action Civics Week with the Executive Director of the National Council for Social Studies, Larry Paska. Enjoy.
We are really excited to have Larry Paska with us from the National Center for Social Studies. Larry, welcome to the EarthForce live stream. It's great to see you.
It's great to see you too, Vince. Thank you so much for inviting us in, and we're thrilled to celebrate this important event with you.
Thanks. We've had a great time so far. I was telling you before we got started, we had an amazing event with educators last night where they were talking about balancing the joys of youth voice with actually meeting things like standards and such. And so it was, my whole staff was just blown away with how exciting it was. And we're super excited to have you. After we did it last year, I was like, oh, crap, we should have had Larry Paska on. This would have been great. So I want to start, Larry, with kind of a big picture question that has been vexing me today, and I think probably a lot of other folks, is that, we're in this time of real turmoil. As you and I are talking, there are campuses, I think I read 75 campuses this morning that are having protests about the situation in Gaza. We've had this whole era of discontent and people not trusting government. And I wanted to start big picture from your point of view is, what is the role of social studies in a time like this, where we have so much conflict and division?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I'm hoping that everyone viewing today, and if you're sharing this recording with your colleagues or friends or people in your networks, that please know that in social studies we do see our core mission as providing really a context for helping students to be active participants in civic life, preparing them for the challenges and the opportunities that they'll have all throughout their lives, and in selecting careers and participating in our democratic processes, voting, engaging in communities, figuring out where to live and jobs to do. And that all starts with us in the social studies classroom, that our kids are coming to school every day and they're asking questions about the world around them, even at the youngest ages. I'm a proud parent of elementary school age kids, and the questions are constantly about the world around them. Everything from how do I make friends to what does it mean when I heard about this in the news to why does it matter where I'm living? And so we start as a core foundation, I think, in social studies, that we help students to ask and answer those questions about the world around them. But then it goes so far beyond us too. We rely on, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, we rely on environmental educators and literacy educators and educators in the arts and humanities, all disciplines, STEM disciplines, to help reinforce kind of that understanding of the world. But I think it's indispensable. I think it's more than ever before. And I think the hard part is that our kids do have so many questions about what's going on around the world. And, we often feel as educators both the pressure of time in a day, to address things, but then also too, sometimes, we are in this environment where there seem to be increasing restrictions on what we can and cannot teach, or what we can and cannot say. And that's unusual for us because, if anything, we've been in an environment through, I think, most of education where it was the opposite. Whenever new standards came out, or a new textbook came out, or new curricula came out for our schools, it was about inclusion. It was about how do we bring in as many stories as possible and bring in as many perspectives as possible. And that felt overwhelming because we wanted to do those stories justice. We wanted to be fair to representing different perspectives, worldviews, stories that shape human experience. And now we're kind of in this opposite where we're told, here's what you can't say. That feels very different. But I think as social studies educators, we do see first and foremost that our job is to help to spark that sense of inquiry, of curiosity about the world around us, about human experience, and help our students to prepare for the wonderful participants in our world that they'll become as they become adults.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned your kids and that they're still in grade school. I remember being super proud in grade school, and then when she got to middle school, I was a reluctant parent. So it was one of those challenges. So we did an event last night with teachers, as I mentioned, and one of them was a social studies teacher, and she talked quite a bit about how she integrated the standards of what the kids were supposed to learn into the day-to-day work that they were trying to do. I mean, this teacher actually said, I've never heard this before, Larry, I'll probably never hear this again. She talked about the joy of the standards and having them as learning. And she had posted them on the wall and was talking about how, she and her students dissected them and worked with them. And I was wondering if you could take a minute for me and for us to talk about kind of the C3 standards that you have, and how those interrelate to what we're trying to do, which is environmental action civics, and where you see those pieces coming together.
Sure. I love that about Joy of Standards. When I was a teacher, I posted our state standards up on the wall too. And I would kind of point to them periodically because our standards were broken out into, and I was a teacher in New York State, in 5 kind of subject areas like geography, economics, participation in government. And we would talk a lot, I was a middle school teacher, we would talk about how they intersect. So even though we're here studying history, we can't have history without geography. We can't have geography without understanding civic life. We can't have participation in government without thinking about the role of world history and the impact of things happening around the world. So I like that notion. Let me tell everybody about C3 if you're not familiar with it. So the C3 framework stands for the College, Career, and Civic Life Framework for State Social Studies Standards. So this was intended to be a document that helps states and districts develop their social studies standards through the lens of inquiry. So I talked a moment ago about inquiry, curiosity, kind of that passion we have about studying what it means to be human, what it means to create and live in a human-made world. So the C3 framework was developed by over a dozen professional organizations like us. We had partners in geography education, history education, civics, all shaping this document. And it works along the lines of an inquiry arc. So this is not a set of standards that you adapt curriculum, and this is a framework that you create your standards with. So if you go to the next slide, I want to share with everyone what this inquiry arc is about. We define inquiry in social studies in 4 dimensions. And the first is developing questions and planning inquiries. So what are students innately curious about? What are the questions they're asking about the world around them? And I challenge everyone who's viewing today to think about what's a question you heard a child ask in the past week. And it could be anything, right? It could be a child you met in a supermarket line. It could be a child you teach. It could be a child in your home. Maybe at a friend's party, a kid was running around asking questions. What were those questions? I guarantee you those questions are probably rooted in the social studies, some way, something about the human experience, right? So the question for us is, how do we harness those questions into our curriculum? How do we create instructional experiences around them? So now we figure out if we have a really good question that a child's asked, and if you're thinking about a question, if you want to even throw in the chat box a question you heard a child ask in the past week, go for it. What disciplines, what concepts, disciplinary tools help answer that question? Is that a question rooted in history? Is it rooted in geographical reasoning? Is it rooted in economic thinking? Is it rooted in a study of the environment? What disciplines help answer that question? Next, in the inquiry process, we identify sources and use those sources as evidence to address that question. So what I love about the connection with the C3 framework and environmental education is that sources are physically, literally all around us. We're not confined to the printed word. We're not confined to pre-recorded video. We really can use the world around us in a very literal way as a source of evidence. And then the last part of our framework is communicating conclusions and taking informed action. And what this means is not just term papers that answer the question that's been created, but how do we communicate what we've learned in a way that is not just meaningful to the learner, but possibly is something that could be used long-term in preparing for active civic life. So let me give you an example. My favorite inquiry question, I think, of all time, those of you who may have seen me present before have heard me say this, is, does where you live matter? Why I love that question is because I firmly believe any discipline can address that question. I also believe kids at any age can answer that question. As an adult, I'm still answering that question. And, a kindergartner is going to ask, does where you live matter? Maybe in terms of how close they are to school, how close they are to their friends, can they walk places? But a high school or a college age student or us as adults may answer that in terms of, where can I afford to live? How close is it to my job? What's the cost of living like for food and gas and other essentials that I need? So we answer that question in different ways. But how do we communicate the answer to that question? Are you blogging about it? Are you making videos about it? Are you deciding to apply for a certain type of job and make a difference in your community about it? And the idea of taking informed action is, how could I, either on a personal level or right up to a global level, a societal level, address that question in my life? And so the last slide I just want to share is kind of emphasizing, what is a question worth asking? What tools and concepts apply? What sources answer the question? And then what do I do with the answer once I have it? And inquiry questions are meant to be prove it questions, right? They're yes, no, but prove it. What sources can help you prove it? What I love about the work that environmental educators do every day is that you live and breathe, to me, this last dimension, this notion of, what do I do with the information that I've found through my sources in answering this question? And so I invite all of you viewing this to look at the C3 framework, look at the way we've structured the inquiry process in it. We have this right available on our website, and we welcome all of you to engage in us in the social studies community in a conversation about how your work intersects with what happens in social studies, because I think it's a natural connection. And when I think about the work that happens in a lot of environmental literacy curricula, for example, it's so much about problem solving and that notion of communicating conclusions, proving a point, and taking action. And I think that's where its power lies most. And I think that also helps us to elevate this idea of, how do we help shape our knowledge of human experience, the human story, through really compelling questions. So I'll just kind of stop there and say, what do you think about the C3? Like,
I actually, so I haven't thought about it as much as you have. You and I have talked about it a couple times, fast, but as you describe it, there are two elements of what we think is essential to education, especially environmental action civics. We just think is essential. But the first is that young people learn based on their lived experience. Right, which is the same question that you're asking. What are kids asking questions about? What's important to them? And we had a teacher on last night, and I'm sorry I keep referencing it, but we asked them, using environmental action civics, how does that change your education? And she was like, switching to what the kids are interested in was like, bang. It became a whole new thing, because now we're not trying to learn something that's abstract and blah, 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 but we're really just trying to learn what they care about, right? We're trying to apply that. So the other essential piece that we think is important is that you take that and do something with it, right? You don't just hold on to it as a piece of knowledge. You do something with it. And I was talking to somebody yesterday about Facebook activism, and I was like, that's fine, it's fine and good, but there's something to just talking to people in your community, and to being out there and saying, I care about X, Y, or Z, whatever that might be. And I just think there's some value to that, right? There's something unique to doing that. And I think you share that. I think that's where the social studies standards are, they're trying to get us to think outside of ourselves and to engage people beyond the community. Or am I stretching that a bit?
You're not. I think, again, the challenge is time in a day, right? On average, we have 180 school days. We're dividing that time out. We are aware that many schools are struggling to keep their social studies requirements moving. We try to work with schools to help them with, prioritize it at elementary, please, every day. And yet at the same time, the activism piece is important. So to us, I think the power of things like Action Civics, or, I'll extend it to say Action Geography or Action, Economics.
Sure, yeah.
It's this idea that it isn't just enough to know things. It's, you may not apply your knowledge in every context, but I am so humbled at the number of not just student-focused organizations that have started up over the past decade, but the number of organizations that are also started by students, like just learning about, a learner's not waiting until they're 18 and ready to vote to set up a C3. When I was 14, 15, I didn't know about setting up C3s and how that worked. So I'm humbled just by that. But when I see that, I just think that's the informed action piece. That's the action piece of, I have a problem I've solved in writing. I think it's important. I don't know if it's going to be my life's work, but I'm really excited about doing something about it. And now we bring in the piece of, did you know you could set up a business to focus on that? Did you know you could be a publisher on that topic? Did you know you could make, and I think that's where we want to encourage our inquiry process to go. But we are mindful of instructional time. It's still important to have knowledge. There are state requirements like assessments and things. We want to be mindful of that. And if you said what's really the biggest challenge of implementing an inquiry model, it's managing the curricular expectations that are very real and very important with the idea of kind of a process that starts with students' curiosities in mind and leads them to develop the skills, the processes to act on them ultimately in the future.
Yeah, so I totally hear that. Last time you and I met, though, you were talking about like a citizenship certification or something at a state level.
Yeah, but
I'm sure I'm getting that wrong. Could you give me a little bit about that?
Yes. So some states are moving towards what's called a seal of civic readiness. And and there are several states now around the country to have this. If you're listening and you know of this, please research in your state. If it's something you want to advocate for, at NCSS, we actually have a part of our toolkit is called a Seal of Civic Readiness Toolkit. It's available on our website at socialstudies.org. And what these are really, it's just a measure of competency and time that students have given to being prepared for active civic participation. So there are things they can do above and beyond their school curriculum. It's meeting certain course requirements with a certain GPA, for example. And we also we at NCSS host an honor society called Rho Kappa, and it's for students in high school who demonstrate strength in social studies. They want to gain some acknowledgement for their work. They also have to complete a project that's locally run but rooted in some kind of civic action or civic activity that can inspire them just beyond the formal curriculum. So there are those approaches, and I would encourage listeners to seek those out. What are things that can enhance your instruction, especially if you're playing with the concept of inquiry for the first time, and if you feel overwhelmed by an inquiry arc and you want to start kind of small, think about some of those activities that could be enhancements to what you're currently doing.
Yeah. Well, this has been great, Larry. I've kept you the time that I said I would. It's been super fun. And if you're just interested in more about Larry's organization, it's just socialstudies.org, right?
Socialstudies.org, and we're always pleased to partner with Earth Force on the work you do. And again, for all of you listening, thank you for your interest and support in social studies. We're also here to help you, and between Vince and I, we're here to help make inquiry come alive for you, especially as you're trying to manage so many curricular challenges and things in the day. Just know that our organizations together want to help work to support you. So we're here for you.
Well, and a shout out to Larry. He's working tirelessly to solve the problems he's identified, like the limited amount of time that we spend on social studies, and that he spends his entire life working on that. And so thank you. I think you deserve a lot of credit there. So we're going to sign off. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.